Hello and welcome. This is the fifth session in our monthly webinar series hosted by the International Transformative Learning Association. My name is Kristen Simone. I'll be your host for today's webinar. In addition to Frank Connor, who I will introduce shortly, I'm joined today by Brian On. He will be lending his tech skills to today's webinar. Brian is a doctoral student at Teachers College at Columbia, and he's one of our emerging scholars in the field, as well as a member of the ITLA. You may also recognize him from the video series on the 5 critical questions. He shared his reflections on question 5. So please join me in thanking Brian for his assistance and contributions to today's webinar. So it's a custom here at the ITLA to begin our webinars with an expression of gratitude. So here we acknowledge where we find ourselves within this global community, our places and spaces that we occupy, as well as our appreciation for those who came before us and in whose footsteps we follow. Additionally, we'd like to thank the stewards of the ITLA for their vision and for the leadership circle in particular for their work that has been gradually transforming that vision into what we know today as the ITLA. Most importantly, though, we want to thank this community. It is the life force of transformative learning scholarship and practice. And so it's the heads, hands, and hearts of this community that make transformative learning a living theory. And so thank you to all of you for being here today and for the important work that you're doing. So our mission at the ITLA is to promote critical scholarship, research, teaching, application, and praxis of the social, scientific, artistic, and humanistic principles of transformative learning theories and practice. And we do this through our core activities, education, research, and practice. And at the center or the heart of those activities is community. The ITLA has also articulated a set of core values that guide our work, and we're highlighting one of those values in each of these monthly webinar sessions. So this month, we are inviting you to consider the value of truth wisdom. And this is defined as reflection to develop insights about interrelationships of people and systems. So as we engage today with the 5 critical questions, we invite you to consider what insights are emerging for you and for others that speak to these interrelationships between and among these topics of inquiry. And so now on to today's event. First, let me introduce our speaker and our facilitator for today, a man who probably needs no introduction, and it's my sincere pleasure to introduce Dr. Frank Connor. Frank is a professor of psychology and chair of the psychology department at Grand Rapids Community College. As a cognitive scientist, Frank brings a sociocultural framework to his research and understanding of the ways in which human beings construct meaning. A constant thread in his work has been a whole systems approach to organizational and community change, believing that all people should have a voice in the construction of their world. Frank began his career as a consultant in the training and implementation of technology, with a focus on the application of computer-aided design and manufacturing. Frank co-authored or authored a dozen books on this subject. Many of you also know Frank as the co-chair of ITLC 2022, as well as the co-convener of the gatherings and facilitator of the discussions around the 5 critical questions. Frank's here today to share with us his own learnings from facilitating these conversations, as well as to lend his skillful facilitation toward moving the conversations and, importantly, the ideas and visions that have emerged from them forward. And so with that, thank you, Frank, for being here. And I hand the mic over to you.
Thank you, Kristen. So today, as Kristen outlined, we are going to continue to engage with the 5 critical questions. But in today's session, I want to quickly highlight those of you who were in previous sessions. I'll talk about them very briefly in a moment. The gathering of 30, the extended gathering, and conversations since then. We've tried to build in a set of principles in which we engage as a community. And we have these 4 guiding principles that we use. Later on today, you're going to break into small sessions, into small groups. And these are our guiding principles that we brought forward in day 1, and we're continuing to work with them. The first one is, as you're engaging in your small groups, seek to understand the other person. Why is he or she or they presenting something in such a way, or to have a different view? Argument is great. We love argument as scholars. It's part of who we are, but at the same time, it's only one way of being in a space together. Trying to understand another is a very and equally important way. Share your own truths. You are here as a participant with background, experience, passion around these topics, and we encourage you, we invite you to share your own truth. To assume that everybody in the community has value, and we want to hear what they have to say, which brings us to our 4th one, which is to create a space for all who are present, to pause and to listen and to let others meet those first 2 principles. Why are we here today? So today is to continue to build community connections. It's a value of ITLA. It's a value of our community. It has always been a value of our community, going back to the first conference that Jack convened many, many years ago. We want to focus our dialogue now around the 5 questions. We've been doing that to date, but we want to become more specific about it. We want to do some whole group engagement. But what we're really focused on today, what the outcomes of today, is individual commitments and a plan for moving forward. Actually, 5 plans, at least 5 plans. There is no one right way to move forward around these questions, but we want at least 5. We want each one of them. Sorry, I was reading the chat and it threw me off a little bit. I don't think I have a metronome going somewhere, but weird sounds come through the internet. So one of the pieces that is very critical and somewhat different around the previous ones is we have a primary goal today when we leave to have some kind of sense of how are we going to move forward individually around these 5 questions. But to adhere to the first one, community connections, we are going to do, as we have in the past, we're going to randomly break you into groups of 3. Doesn't matter what question is interesting to you right now, because this is about community building. It's not about the 5 questions. And we're going to randomly move you into groups of 3. You're going to have 15 minutes, which is actually quite a while. We're going to give you till about 2:30 to share, why are you here? Why is being here important to you? And how do you hope to use the experience in your future? And I acknowledge that these questions are overlapping, but each one is somewhat different and specific. So again, we're going to randomly put you into groups of 3. Why are you here? Why is being here important to you? And how do you hope to use experience in your future? So any moment now, you're going to see a request pop up for you to join a room, and please do, and either meet somebody new or engage with somebody for the first time.
Welcome back, everyone. I hope you spent some time with someone that you already met or got to know somebody new. I also hope that I fixed the problem with my microphone. Unfortunately, you can't quite trust technology. Sometimes humans know more. It was automatically setting the volume, was creating problems, and so when I turned that off, now it seems to be working. So I want to spend a little time creating the history of these 5 critical questions for you. Many of you know this. Many of you actually are part of this history. But it's important to continue to share, at least in the short run right now, before we move forward. So, as you all know, or most of you know, well, everybody knows everything was delayed worldwide for a while, including the International Transformative Learning Conference, which was supposed to be 2 years before we actually held it in 2022. And when the conference was delayed, there was still a lot of desire and energy around continuing the work. As with all of us, we didn't want to simply allow the pandemic to stop our areas of scholarship, our areas of community work, our areas of educational transformation, etc. So we wanted to continue the energy from the previous conference. So what we wanted to do was to consider what are some of the areas of transformative learning that we really want as a community to investigate. And so to that end, we decided to put together a kind of open space technology. And if you're familiar with open space technology in a large group, it's a way in which you engage folks to organize themselves around areas of interest, areas of passion. And while I've done that many times with large groups, 500, 600, doing it online seemed a bit daunting, but we wanted to give it a try. So what we decided to do was to start with a small group, folks that are well-grounded and practiced in transformative learning. And so we invited a group of about 30 to a session. But before we invited them, we asked them to identify what did they consider some of the critical unanswered questions in transformative learning. And so when they registered, they gave us a list. We went back and organized that list around key themes. And then when we brought the group together, we invited them to evaluate these questions, to modify them, to develop their own. And this is where the 5 emerged. And the group validated that these were critical questions that we as a community needed to entertain and to consider. We then, in October of 2021, brought together an expanded gathering of folks, it was over 100 for that one, who wanted to look more deeply into these 5 questions. The intent was always to roll this forward into the conference. The conference in 2022 was originally again designed to be face-to-face. The pandemic didn't go away as fast as we had hoped, so we made a decision to continue it online, and of course most of you were there. And we held individual sessions on these 5 questions. And in looking at the list, looking at your faces, I know during that time I engaged with several of you. What I then did is to took all of the conversations that we've been having over these 3 major sessions, the gathering of 30, the expanded gathering of over 100, and then the conference itself, and looked at the dialogue, the information, and developed a set of themes that came from these 5 critical questions. So just to remind you, here are the 5 critical questions. I'm not going to repeat them. You have them in front of you. That's why you showed up, because you are interested in one or more of them. But here are the primary themes. So I'm going to share these and try and create some context for them. If you have a very specific question, feel free to answer it. But these are not specific to one of the 5 questions, but they're the themes that cut across all 5. And the themes that came out of the original group of 30, group of 100, and the conference itself. So one of the themes was to connect the work of transformative learning outside the community of transformative learning. To take the work that we are doing, the research that we're doing, and bring it to others. A second one was to honor individual meaning making. This was the idea that Oftentimes in trying to change a person or a system, we make some assumptions about them, and in fact, in looking at the themes, that somehow that person is wrong or has had a journey that brought them to the wrong place. But then you need to begin where people are, and to not only begin to where they are, but to honor where they are, and to use that as a starting point, not as a place to demean them, not as a place to somehow suggest that their journey has been the incorrect journey, but it's around honoring. And this became pretty strong with a lot of the DEI conversations around how do we invite some of these folks in the room who don't even want to have the conversation. Acknowledge individual self-esteem, behaviors, and cognitions are rooted in belonging. This could also say rooted in community, and in fact, in my first draft, that's what it said, but as I went back and read and looked at some of the information that came forward. So how you feel about yourself, how you feel about others, the ways in which you act, the ways in which you think are in part a manifestation of the community to which you belong. And that was a strong theme. These themes sort of mix back and forth in between sort of some foundational understandings, but also around some ways to move forward. So this next theme is more around ways to move forward, to create meaningful experiences to engage with disparate people. This is really connected to Gordon Allport's contact hypotheses. If we want, so it connects to that bullet before, if we believe that being human is rooted in belonging and rooted in community, if you want to change an individual, then you have to have them engage with people not like them, but it has to be a meaningful exercise, a meaningful activity for the people themselves. A second theme that continued to come up is this sort of co-creation, relationship, juxtaposition. I mean, these are all different in the same, is that we need to focus on changing systems and people, that individuals and the systems in which they engage are equally important. You can focus on people who then change systems or systems that change people, but we have to recognize that they're all together. Deconstruct truth as a tool to control individuals. This was stated many different ways. One of the groups was quite passionate about getting back to the origins of adult education. The whole idea of adult education as it emerged, working with unions in the 1800s and early 1900s, working in the work of the Highland Institute. I mean, all of these Highlander School, all of these different ways in which adult education is rooted in social justice. Make transformative learning theory accessible, which also speaks to the language we use, the places where we write, the people with whom we communicate. Scholars write quite eloquently for other scholars. And so how do we take the work of transformative learning and present it in folks who aren't part of an academic community? Attach transformative learning to other movements. And there were several examples that came up. Movements around sustainability, DEI, economic development, social movements. One of the comments is we need to make transformative learning hip. I'm not really sure what that means other than it was connected to social movements. And then also tell stories of success. That people like stories. We've evolved to, stories long before printed documents were out there. Stories is how our brain thinks. So we need to create stories that people hear and they help them understand. Again, it's a way of making accessible, but you make it accessible through stories. So these were the broad themes that came out of really an engagement with many, many people over what has now been over a year. You're going to have time to engage with these, but I I've tried to explain them, but any very quick questions of clarification before we move to our next part of the day? Since most of this came from most of you, I would hope that at least resonates with you to some degree. That this is the dialogue that was captured from the work that's gone on for the last couple of years. Next step. Now you are going to break out into groups specific to the question that is important to you. For some of you, you may have more than one question that's important, but for today, we're asking you to choose one of the 5. And in that room, we want you to consider this. What is your personal connection to the question? What do you think? Why do you think this is a question of importance? How would you define success? What resources are available? And what do we need to move forward? What we want to come out today, when we're done today, we want the start of an action movement. We want to move from talking about these 5 questions to actually addressing the 5 questions. So this breakout is really a transitional period. What's your connection? Personal. Why do you think it's a question of importance? Why are we spending any time on it? How would you define success? How do we know that we've actually done something? If we're going to move forward, what resources we need, and how do we need to move forward? We're also in the next step, so I'll just reveal what's coming up. We're also going to ask you to commit. We need individuals who are willing to commit to helping move these questions forward. So you don't have to talk about that at the moment, but help us make more meaning out of these 5 questions. So, in a magical moment here, 5 options are going to show up, and you are going to pick one of these where you're going to spend about the next half hour addressing these questions and then being willing or be ready to report out your thoughts, your understanding, parts of your dialogue at the end of the session. Oh, if you want to work on more than one at some point in the future, not a problem. We're going to have a sign-up sheet that's going to come out to you later, a form. And if you want to be engaged with more than one of these questions, you will have the option to do it. Today, we're asking you to just choose one of them. Welcome back. I hope that you had a spirited conversation. What we'd like to do now is to bring this whole group. Yes, I agree. One of the things, talk about time, there is never enough time. And that is the constraint that we all live with. And we all hate it. But there are so many constraints. So here's what we'd like you to do, though. We want to continue the dialogue, not around those specific questions, but in a whole group. So we're sort of talk about some of those, but we've got probably 15 minutes where we can just have a conversation. So one of the things I'm asking for you to share, if you wish, and you can, some of you, I would hope you would unmute yourself and share, but at the same time, anything you want to put in the chat will be stored. So if there's any individual comments, anything that you really want us to capture as we move forward, please put that in the chat. But the first thing I want you to think about is in those sessions, what happened in the previous session that evoked the most energy? Was there a point or a couple of points where it just felt like this was something important that was being discussed because of the emotional response that either individually or collectively you had to what was said or what was felt? So please share, and there's no constraints here.
No, I was really glad, and I feel really privileged to be here with you. I felt a bit like an outsider at the beginning because it's the first time I'm participating to your meetings. But our group, I thought our group was great. We were such multicultural group. We had Muslim Bosnian, Jewish Brazilian, that it's me, an Asian, an African, and an American, and our talk was just great. And I'm sorry that it ended so fast.
If I can add, I was in the group with Marina. I thought it was fascinating that, in essence, the first question, Frank, that you had posed, what is your connection to this question, is really what led all of us to respond to an extent to all of the other questions. When one works on, we focused on de-radicalization. So clearly there's an element of hate and violence, extremist violence, targeted violence that is of concern to all of us. And what I had observed, and I would love other group members to comment on it, is that we all had a personal connection to it in some where we ourselves experienced it, or we had history of someone experiencing it, or we were advocates for change, and in some cases, all of the above, to prevent it going forward, because either our personal or community history was marked by hate, extremism, and targeted violence. So I thought that was fascinating, that it is our personal that was really driving our professional decisions and areas of focus in the work that we do.
It's really interesting to me. Kristen and I spent a lot of time in the break talking about the themes, and obviously the themes resonated with several of you, because you actually wanted to talk about the themes, not the questions, and the themes, as I said, emerged across. But one of the themes that I think that just struck me, even just how powerful it is this whole idea of the personal. And about transformation. I mean, we all know this, right? I mean, we're all transformative learning scholars. We've spent years, decades in some cases with it, but we've got to make the experience personal if we want to change others and systems. And I think that's just becoming through so powerful in what you just said, but also as I start reflecting on a theme within the themes. Others, where did you find energy? What ideas, concepts, conversation?
Can I go back? Oh,
okay. Go ahead, David.
Oh, no, still doctoral candidate, can't go before you. Rules.
Well, this is Cheryl Baldwin, and I just wanted to add quickly, we had a nice little chat. But a common theme for us was coming to transformative learning to find ways to not only study it, but to gather knowledge to improve our work in places where we see change needed, where transformative learning would serve. And we did kind of look at that sometimes finding those answers can be difficult amongst the long history of literature and the way that literature is spread out in multiple places.
I think that clearly came through in the themes as well. And that's not on, in structuring the conference. I mean, that was something that we struggle with and continue to struggle with.
And I think you also have right here, I've been to a lot of conferences and meetings. Look how many people have their camera on. And a lot of conferences, there's not one person but the presenter, and it's just that just raw ability to show emotion, to take a lead and a leap towards something and say, I'm going to put myself out there, so in hopes that we can learn from each other. And a powerful moment came when one person was talking about the fear of death, like he was getting older, and I can't fully relate to that, but there was a connection there. Just the connection of understanding this uncertainty, this journey that always has these flows, these ups and these downs. And it's so good to have a community that cares and is willing to be diverse and be okay with the diversity. I love that. I want to be diverse and have people disagree with me. You know, I think we've just gotten so divided, and so this is the way or that is the way. And I want to understand why you think that.
Anyone else have any moments that they wish to share? And again, whether it's personal, whether it is ideas, concepts, observations.
Oh, thanks, Frank, Dr. Carner, for asking. I guess for the most part, transformative learning. If you go by Jack Mesereau, Dr. Mesereau's definition, it starts internally first. It starts at the individual first, right? But de-radicalization and DEI and all these kind of, how are you able to create a sustainable environment to create a more ethical framework for society? Transformational learning or transformation needs to happen throughout, and especially in the de-radicalization group, we talked about how, especially on Amra's case in Bosnia and Felix's case in Nigeria, and Marina's in Brazil, and David's in the U.S., Tennessee, and me in Orange County, California. Basically, the main thing is how are we able to de-radicalize, and how are we able to create this? How are we able to create this hip framework, transformative learning in a hip way, to make other people acknowledge the power that one can go through if one is more open to the ideas of transforming the world for the better? And I think that's a very powerful kind of connecting the dots. At least for me, this is the kind of insight I got from our discussion.
One of the things that I just said this a moment ago, but Brian's comments sort of reiterated, I feel like I need to say it again, and is that what this session has brought to me is that the themes are more powerful than I was thinking they were going to be. I was thinking the themes were simply going to be a tool for helping us sort of move forward and think, but I think there's something really powerful in those themes. And it's not surprising when you reflect on where they came from. People who are doing the work in, year and a half worth of conversations and dialogue, because they do cut across the 5 questions. And one of the things that Kristen and I talked about and that we're going to commit to do is to figure out a way to interweave those themes with the work that happens moving forward around the questions, and to remove some silos that so oftentimes happen when you start working on one question and you have other people who are working on a similar question or a completely different question. But, if we're talking about belonging as a theme, belonging applies to every one of these questions. And de-radicalization, I mean, belonging is a big part of radicalizing somebody, and so it's also a big part of de-radicalizing them. So the next question is more general, but it will become very specific.
Report out from our group?
Yes, go ahead.
I wondered if Gail wanted to report out, or anybody from our group. I found it very interesting to hear the context that people were working in, especially Gail, who spoke. I don't know if you want to say anything, but one of the themes that came up was what language are we using? And Ken, who had to leave us, talked about how inner core humanity connects us. And Gail brought up the context that she's working in, and I thought that was really interesting about how do we take this forward, working, joining a community and building connectedness with us is great, but also how do we take that beyond? and that the fact that we want to keep meeting regularly like this off the conference time, but drawing from other experience and practice, how do we do that? How do we? And for me, I'm thinking, you know, I'm on intersectional movements, you know, so I'm trying to figure out how, you know, how to decarceralize our world. Right? I mean, prison reform, reproductive rights, all of it, you know, it's a mess. But how do we put the demands forward that communities have raised, and, you know, and engage with that, with transformative learning beyond just the classroom? And what does that mean for allyship? And does transformative learning work with how to be allies? Kind of thoughts. Thank you.
And I think that's very consistent with the themes that came out. I mean, just so consistent with the need to connect to other initiatives, to, you know, to inform, to
and help sort them out, because
right.
We have a divided country here, you know. And I think the sorting out of what are at issues and what are, you know, constructs for understanding, you know, why we're so divided, right? So thank you.
I'm going to skip the second question, because we're going to ask you to commit to that, or give some ideas, or we're also going to one of the things we're going to do is send out a form in the next couple of days to all of you, but to everybody who's participated in any of the work, to get us to start self-organizing around now the specific 5 questions. So you will choose to belong to one or more groups, but the group will be meeting around one of the questions. It's become more and more clear that we have to find ways to keep the groups connected, but the primary focus is going to be around one of the questions. So the question, besides leaders, is, what do you imagine is needed next to move forward, and where would we get that? What do you need, and by whom? What would help you move forward around these questions? And just thinking about one at a time. Well, any one of them, but one question.
I was going to say space. Spaces to collaborate, like just that engagement. I think that we get so excited, and then you just kind of lose steam and go back to what you were doing. And, you know, can we teach transformative learning if we're just going back to our comfort zones? And that's what I see, everyone willing to keep going, and just space to have that and be together.
So I would just add to that, because if we need space, and obviously because of the international nature of the group, that's going to be virtual for the most part. Hopefully there are times when maybe in the next conference we can get folks together face to face, but that requires then an organizer and a facilitator, and all that goes with it. Organizers, doesn't have to be one, shouldn't be one. What else? You know, what can the ITLA provide, or what can you imagine? What? Don't even assume that it's reasonable at this point.
Can I say something?
Yes,
yeah, please go. You go, Constance.
And then Toby.
Thank you. I think from my end, I'm thinking also, apart from the space for these conversations, we probably also need the practical actions within our spaces. Thinking of how we can move from theory to practice. And so maybe I'm saying this because I'm new to the space. So I'm thinking in my own day-to-day work, as someone who supports students in transition, how can I try and incorporate transformative learning in the way in which I do my work? Because my question of interest is question 3, which has to do with democracy. So sometimes we are, like, especially when we are, for some of us who live in very polarized communities, we think of democracy as something that has to be, it has to be practiced from the top. So we wait upon our institutions to change their rules, their policies. We seek for them to transform the way they do things. But sometimes we may also not see the power that we have to actually act. And so for me, I find this community as a space where perhaps if I have an idea with regards to the practical ways in which I can assist my students, perhaps putting it out there and asking for comments and so on, I may actually get something more practical going beyond the theoretical level conversations. Thank you.
And that's very much a goal of our work, is the whole theory to practice. We all been wallowing in theory for decades. It is the practice area where there's a real significant need.
I was just going to offer something. I note the question that Deborah's posted about de-radicalization. That's an interesting one. The one I was going to offer more generally is goes to that theme about embedding transformative learning, language and practice. And I just wonder if there's an element about the relevance and being responsive to something that's happening across sectors. And of course, we've just had the pandemic and still having a bit of a pandemic, which has created issues around resilience, both institutional and personal. And I just wonder whether picking up on something like that is happening across society, and then offering guidelines or toolkits is a way of jumping into that, whatever that moment is that's being created. Because whilst we've had the pandemic, hopefully now in the rearview mirror a bit, there is even more uncertainty and tension that's coming in the world, which is creating a whole host of challenges, as well as the soaring inflation. And so there's no shortage of hooks one potentially uses. But anyway, sorry, that's slightly rambling, but just a bit of a thought.
No, I think you're exemplifying that the one of the last themes there around, we need to take transformative learning and attach it to societal issues or other movements or things that are happening in our world, not just to make it abstract, but to for lack of a better phrase, piggyback to something bigger or something that already has the energy, as opposed to us trying to create it. We are at the end of our time, but if, again, please post anything that you want in the chat. I see a few of you have done that. That will be captured. We're going to send out a link to all of you, which will have a form for you to provide some more specific information, your own commitment to engage, asking if you wish to become part of a group of leaders. I think in part, one of the things we're going to want to do is to have those who volunteer to be leaders to probably provide input on what they think should happen to move this forward. If you're going to be the leader or one of multiple leaders, we don't expect any single leader in any single question, then we need your voices on how you want to do it, what makes sense for you, and then we will see what resources the ITLA can provide and looking for other resources to move you forward. So thank you to everyone. It's been a great session. All of them have. It's been an honor to be part of this community again, and continuing to be, and particularly this time around the conference. I think at least conceptually in all of our minds, the conference is over now, and we are moving on to the next stage. which is to take the work of the conference and now move it forward as is best by those of you who care about these questions. So thank you.
Thank you, Frank. Thank you, everyone, for being here. So just dropped in the chat. Our next webinar will be on June 15th, same time, starting 2 p.m. Eastern, and this will be the Association of Transformative Learning Theory with the perspective of Freire. That's co-hosted by Alexis Kokos and Claudio Melicarne. And if you haven't yet joined us at the ITLA, please do consider. And I've dropped the link to the website with more membership details there. As always, thank you very much for being here. It's wonderful to connect in community, and we look forward to moving these ideas forward and continuing to connect with you all in the months and years to come. Wishing you all well and have a great day or evening, wherever you are.
Or morning.
Or morning, yes.